Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Navy SEAL veteran, Echelon Front leadership instructor, and the founder of Primal Beef, Sean Glass. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his unique journey into the military, notable deployments, the Afghanistan withdrawal, the industrial military complex, sleep and performance, regenerative farming, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Sean Glass. Enjoy. Well, Sean, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to Jason Gardner, who for the second time brought me along to the Echelon Front in Orlando. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
I appreciate that. Jason is a good friend of mine, mentor of mine. I joke around that he has been babysitting me for a long time, both in and out of the SEAL team. So he's a good man, and I'm glad he brought us together. And I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, very first question then. Where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
Okay, well, right now I'm in my office, which is in our pole barn, which is on our farm in Virginia. So my family and I have about a 60-acre farm in the northwest corner of Virginia, right in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley. So we got pretty lucky. It's a beautiful farm. It's a very historic farm. It's been running since the mid 1860s. We've got cattle as our main thing, and then we've got some chickens just for us, basically. But it's been a nice way to transition out of city life in San Diego, where I was when I was in the Navy, and kind of get back to the way that I grew up, which was on a farm as well out in Texas. So this is my office, which is why it doesn't look too fancy or too well decorated. But this is where I take all my calls and do stuff like that for Echelon.
Yeah, well, my office behind me is a mess, but I never show my videos, so I can get away with it. All right, well, just before we go to the beginning of your timeline, we just had that crazy cold front blast through. What was your experience in Virginia?
Well, we got about 10 inches of snow and then about 2 inches of frozen rain on top of that. And then we stayed in the 20s basically for almost a month. So right now it's in the 50s and it's starting to melt. It's almost all melted off, but we had just a layer of 10 inches of ice basically for almost a month, which, it definitely throws a wrench in a lot of systems, especially on a farm. It means that you're putting out a lot more food every day for the cows because they can't reach the grass and they use the food to regulate their temperature. So it was like every day rolling out hay for them. And then we have 5 kids and they love to be outside, but it's like, what are they going to do outside with ice? So it was basically like, hey, board games. If they weren't at school, it was like we were playing board games or cards or something for a month straight, which is actually pretty cool. But I am very happy to not have the snow on the ground anymore.
Yeah. I grew up on a farm, and I remember the horse troughs were a big problem because they would freeze over. And this is England, not as cold as Virginia.
Yeah.
How do you keep the hydration going during the freeze?
So we're very fortunate, and we have 2 different sources of live water on the farm, and they cover basically almost the entire farm. So we've got a smaller creek at the front of our property, and then we have about a 20-foot creek that runs into the Shenandoah River. So that thing's always running. It's never frozen. It basically moves too fast and has too much volume of water in it. So the cows are in that back pasture where that creek is. So they always had access to the water. Even if maybe it was a little bit colder than they were used to, they could still get it.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned Texas, so let's start at the very beginning then. Tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yep. Yep. So I was born outside. Well, I was actually born in Dallas, but we lived in a town called Blooming Grove, which is a little like 1,000-person town, and we weren't really even in the town of Blooming Grove. That was just kind of the nearest zip code that they could attach to us, so we could get mail. And the city that we kind of did school, sports, all that stuff in was called Corsicana, and we lived probably about 15 minutes outside of Corsicana. And my parents had a small farm. It was about 57 acres, I think. And they raised, primarily when I was younger, they raised Arabian horses and then offloaded those about halfway through my childhood and had some other animals. But, I had mom, dad, two sisters, one older, one younger, and me. And then outside of that, I mean, really kind of your normal childhood, church, school, sports, all that good stuff.
Did you ride a lot when you were younger?
I did not, and I regret it, but I was pretty young. And to us, it was, at least to me, it was just work. The horses were just more work. And even if I wanted to ride the horses, it was still work. It was like, well, you got to get them in the stall. You got to put the saddle on them. You got to ride them for a little bit. Then you got to let them cool down. Then you got to wipe them down. Then you got to do this. Then you got to. So for me, no, I did not ride them that much. And looking back at it, it was definitely a wasted opportunity. But I think I was like 10 maybe when we started getting rid of the horses. So, if we had horses today, I would definitely utilize them a lot more. But as a kid, for me, I looked at a horse as like 1,000 pounds worth of work.
Yeah, we had the same. My dad was a horse vet, a veterinary surgeon, so we never actually owned our own horses. My sister had one when she was younger, and then my mum had one, but the rest of us just had to ride whatever was being boarded at the time, which was,
Yeah.
like Russian roulette on horseback, basically.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably smart of your dad too. He's like, I know how much horses cost as the horse vet, so we're not getting one. We'll borrow everybody else's.
Well, he had 5 kids too, so he's like, well, if one of them dies,
Awesome.
it is what it is, saves money.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, then, so what about your parents? What were they doing profession-wise?
So my mom was a medical tech before we were born, and then when my oldest sister was born, she stayed at home until my youngest sister, who's 2 years younger than me, until she was school aged, and then she took a job at our school, at our private school, teaching science, and then she did that almost all the way up until my youngest sister was in high school, and then she switched over. We have a junior college in our hometown in Corsicana, and she took a job as science, biology, kind of running the gamut of instructing over at the junior college, and she just retired, I think, 3 years ago from there. And then my dad was kind of a serial entrepreneur, still is. Him and my uncle, his brother, started a couple different businesses, but the vein of things that they had that ran through all the different businesses, they were always kind of dabbling in real estate, and that's mainly what they do now is buying real estate and managing real estate.
Was your mum teaching when you were a student at the school?
She was, yeah, which was, both good and bad. It was good because if I forgot something, I could just go over and get it from her. It was bad because when I did things like forge her signature on a test that I didn't do very well at, my teacher could just walk my fake signature over to her and go, this is a little shady. Is this really what your signature looks like? And she would go, no, absolutely not. So it had pluses and minuses.
What if you've had this conversation at all? What is your perspective on the devolution or evolution of education over the last couple of decades or so?
There's been some interesting research that's come out that has shown and it just came out like a couple of weeks ago, that's shown for the first time in at least as long as we've been keeping these stats, unfortunately, our kids are dumber than us. And that doesn't happen by accident. And I think the main cause that they're pointing at is the amount of technology in school and the over reliance on technology and the under reliance on kind of like rational learning skills. So My kids are, I think, very fortunate because they go to a private Catholic school in our hometown. That's a classic education. So like they're studying Greek, they're studying Latin, but they're studying like Greek philosophy and the foundations and the pillars of Western civilization. It's a no technology school like whatsoever. So there's no tech in the classroom. There's no phones allowed. But I don't think it's a good thing that we're allowing all this tech in. There's probably a balance that needs to get struck between learning how to be function in a technologically advanced society, but then using that too much to our disadvantage.
I had Dave Castro, one of the heads of
Yeah.
CrossFit and Navy SEAL on a while ago, and he was talking about that. He said they're called the classics for a reason. That's why you teach them, because they've been around for millennia, and obviously the knowledge in there is so important. But I think another kind of reoccurring theme I hear in American education is the standardized testing as well. We're not
Yep.
teaching to inspire kids to have a hunger to learn. We're teaching kids for a test, and in a lot of areas, if that school then doesn't do well in the test, they're financially penalized. Which, if you
Yes.
look at the 100,000 foot view, 10,000 foot view, excuse me, usually the ones in the areas that are struggling need more support, not less. So we've got that whole thing completely backwards as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And just without getting on like a total tire on education, our whole system of instruction is pretty antiquated, and it's based off of a early 19th century form of education that came from kind of like the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And it was designed, their system of education was designed not just to educate the child, but to make good citizens who will do whatever the state tells them to do as far as fighting battles and wars and whatnot. So we had a representative from before it was the Department of Education, that went over there to like study that model and was like, this is great, and brought it back. So I would argue almost from like the founding of what we consider to be our culture of how we teach in this country, I would consider it flawed. And I think there's a lot better systems that we could utilize. But the problem is, how do you restructure an entire system?
hmm I had a guy, Pasi Sahlberg, on the show from Finland, and he tours the world talking about the Finnish system. And you listen to what they do. There's lots of recess. It's a shorter school day, and they're teaching the child holistically, like the whole child, not just grades and academia. So yeah, I think this is one of the things we got to be careful when we beat our chests and say we're the greatest country in the world, because I
Mhm.
always say, A, it's not a competition, it's a round planet, and B, there are a lot of places that do things a lot better than us, and there's things that we do better, so the rising tide lifts all ships. If we actually have the humility to say, well, Finland, Japan, show us what you're doing again, that's how we fix it. But it begins with humility, which I'm sure we'll get into in leadership too.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we already know how to do it. We have different private schools that have this like classical education model. And whether you want to base that on, religious education, like is a big part of my kid's school, or whether you want to just base it off of a classical model of education, we already know how to do it. And we already know that it works in helping the child learn how to learn and enjoy learning. And I will say there's downsides to it as well. My oldest son, who's 15, is taking a like a logic class. So he'll be like, "Dad, that's a fallacy. What you just said. Like that's an appeal to authority." And I'm like, "Pipe down, son. I mean, you're right, but like, take a wrap off. I am the authority in this household."
Well, going back to your childhood again, what were you playing and doing as far as sports and exercise?
Yeah, when I was younger, it was kind of like we played everything. The only sport that I didn't play growing up, that was kind of like a mainstream sport, if you will, was football. And the only reason I didn't is our school where I went, our private school, like it just wasn't big enough for a football team. So, t-ball, baseball, basketball, soccer, all of those things growing up. When I got into high school, I just focused more on soccer. And that was really the only thing that I did as far as like working out was play soccer. And I hated the practices and I really enjoyed the game. But that changed once I decided that I wanted to go into the Navy and try to go in the SEAL teams. I got a lot more serious about my fitness, but that was, 16, 17, 18. Up until then, it was like whatever sport I was playing is basically all I was doing to stay in shape.
Did you have any family members in the military prior to your interest?
So not not really that I had a relationship with. So my great grandfather, and actually there's a couple pictures back there that you can kind of see right now. My great grandfather was a 2-star general in World War II, and his son was an Army officer in World War II who was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. But outside of that, no, not really. So some more distant ties to the military, but nothing recent.
So, what was it that piqued your interest about the SEAL team specifically, and kind of walk me through your journey into enlistment?
Yeah, so I was an avid reader as a kid. I like to think I still am. And we spent a lot of time in the Corsicana Public Library getting books and stuff and loading up. And I was in there one day and there was a military history section. And there was this book that had this guy in a jungle with his face all painted. And it was about SEALs in Vietnam. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything about a SEAL or the SEAL team. So I picked the book up. I read it to cover, and then I was just like, this is what I want to do. And something about that book really resonated with me and really kind of ignited a passion. And since then, that's all I ever wanted to do. So I made it my life's goal from there. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And I graduated high school. I went to Texas A&M University because they had for the only reason that they had a unit in the Corps of Cadets, and I was not in the Corps of Cadets, but they had a unit in the Corps of Cadets that was a group of guys that wanted to go into SEAL training. And basically this unit was stood up by an advisor at A&M many years ago who had been in the SEAL teams and basically set this program up for guys that were interested, and they could come and basically get some knowledge, work out together, prepare together, and hopefully, be a platform for them to make it into the Navy and into the SEAL team. So I went there for that reason. I'm very glad I did. A great group of guys. We would wake up every single morning. Like, my normal day at college was I lived off campus, so I was up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd slam a cup of coffee. I had to be on campus by 5 o'clock because we would start PT at 5:15. We would PT from 5:15 until about 7. Then we would grab some chow at the chow hall, and then I would usually work out again before my classes, and then go to class. I had a job after school that took me until about 5:30 or 6. I'd go home. I would do whatever work I needed for class, or sometimes maybe not do whatever work I needed for class, and then fall asleep and wake up and repeat. And that was kind of my cycle, but it was all because I was single-mindedly focused on wanting to make it, at least get a shot into making it in this community. And it was definitely the right move because I thought I was in really good shape when I went to A&M, and then I met these guys who were actually in good shape, and it re-baselined a couple of things. One, my understanding of what being in condition looked like, and two, my understanding of how far I was capable of pushing myself, because I was so far behind these guys that it took me a really long time to catch up with them. But from there, I got picked up for officer candidate school right when I graduated, and I got a spot to go right from officer candidate school to Coronado to go through SEAL training. So I got the shot, and then once I got out there, it was basically just up to me, as it is everyone who gets to go through that training, whether they make it or not. But all my preparation, all my hard work, all my choices up till then paid off, and I knew at least I was going to get my chance to go through BUDS, as we call it.
I've had so many people from the teams on here now from multiple generations. And, one of the kind of misnomers, I think, of the average person is a SEAL is this, 6'4" bodybuilder, and then you hear about, and you see, some of my friends that are SEALs are not physically imposing people by any means, but, they always allude to the mindset, and obviously coupling that with, as you said, the preparation. What was it that drove you and allowed you to complete BUDS when so many rang the bell?
Oh, man, it's all I wanted to do. So I've been working I was 25 when I made it into the SEAL teams, when I made it into training. So I had been on this journey for 12 years of wanting to do this. So when I got there, there was definitely some nervousness and apprehension about how I was going to stack up against my peers because, in my mind, I'm thinking every single person that makes it to Buzz is like superhuman. They kind of like that person you just talked about. They're 6'4". They're like freak athletes. You know, they were the captain of the football team or the wrestling team or Olympian or something like that. So there was definitely some apprehension. But when I got there, the thing that got me through, which is the same thing that gets anybody through, is just your refusal to quit. And really, if you break that down, it really comes down more towards your focus on what's right in front of you. Every evolution, even the worst evolution, at most is only going to be a couple hours long. And if you can just focus on, I wouldn't even say making it through that evolution because I think that's weak, but performing and doing your best during that evolution, in a couple hours is over with and you're going to move on to something else. I think where guys have a big issue is when they lose the focus on what's right in front of them and they look at buds and the selection pipeline in totality and go, there's no way I can do this for 14 more months. And then it just becomes a spiral. And before they know it, they're standing in front of the bell. So I think another big advantage that I had is I was an officer. So my focus a lot of times wasn't necessarily on my own performance. It was on my team and my boat crew that I was leading. So at times where maybe I would have liked to crawl into my shell and think about how miserable I was, I had the advantage, I think, of also having to worry about how my guys were doing and focusing on them. So it took a lot of my ability to focus on, my own pain away because I had a group of guys that were going through it with me. And ultimately, I was responsible for our performance. And I think that was a huge advantage.
It's funny. That reminds me of something I've always said when it comes to, my choice of profession, which is fire versus police. Anytime someone got in my face when I was younger, I'd shit myself. I would be scared. But I was fearless when it came to getting between two people if they were fighting and trying to be this, even if I knew I was going to get clocked that way too. And I think it's the same thing when you take your focus off yourself, sometimes actually it empowers you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I feel for guys that either didn't feel that same way or didn't have that ability. Like, if you're an enlisted guy going through buds, yeah, you're worried about your boat team, but you're not ultimately responsible for them. So it allowed me to be less focused on myself and more focused on the guys around me, which I thought was very beneficial. The other thing that I think is worthy of bringing up, because I don't know that many people talk about it, but I think it's important and I think it's a good thing, is James, I was terrified to fail. Like this is all I ever wanted to do was be here in this community. And now I had my chance and I did not want to fail. And that fear of failing pushed me to try to be the best at everything I did in Buds. Was I? No, absolutely not. That was a guy named Mike, who was a buddy of mine who went through Buds, who made it look easy. Mike was the best at everything. But I was trying to be the best at everything. And a big portion of that was I was afraid to fail because I had built up so much time and energy and all these different decisions that got me here. And the other thing that I was aware of, because the instructors told us this, was your reputation starts day one of training. And you hear it when you're a student. They're like, one of these days, you're going to be in a platoon with us. And especially as an officer, like one of these days, you might actually be in charge of us. And in my mind, I'm like, well, my reputation starts on day one. That means that I'm going to do everything I possibly can within my power and my control to make sure that reputation is as good as I can possibly make it. And it's funny to hear them say things like, you might be in charge of us one day. But my first platoon, I was an assistant platoon commander. And who was my platoon chief? My favorite instructor from first phase. So I'm in a platoon with the chief that I looked up to the most in first phase. And it was exactly what he said. And, the reason I was in that platoon is because he remembered me and he pulled me in his platoon. So, whether you're going through a selection pipeline, whatever training it is, like you're always being measured by the people around you.
When I reflect back at the sometimes miserable experience of growing up on a farm, whether it's just the sheer physical work, whether it's being cold, whether it's being, in the middle of a rainstorm, lambing, whatever it is, I'm sure that served me well as I progressed through and wanted to become a firefighter. What element do you think of your upbringing on the farm contributed to your success in the teams?
Whew. It's funny for me because if you ask my parents that question, they'd be like, nothing. He was lazy as hell growing up on the farm, which there's probably a lot of truth to that. Um, I was given a lot of freedom when I was a kid, as I think most people are that grow up in rural life, just a ton of freedom. And my parents gave me a lot of freedom throughout my life growing up with them to kind of just figure things out and make mistakes. So I learned pretty quickly that screwing up wasn't the end of the line and making a mistake was not necessarily something to be afraid of. And I think that helped me out because there were people that I went through training with, and I later ran one of the phases of buds later in my career, and I saw this from that perspective too. There are people that have never failed at anything that get to buds, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to fail. Nobody is going to make it through buds unscathed, and some people cannot deal with that failure. I was fortunate enough where I was like, I failed at a million things before in my life. So that failure was more of just a small step back and not like this giant millstone that hung around my neck. When I stopped being lazy was when I decided that I wanted to go into the SEAL teams because in my mind, that was a habit that I just couldn't keep. And I would be willing to bet if you ask my parents, they would back that up and say he did have a tendency to like try to avoid work or do the minimum on the farm. And then when he was a teenager, he made this switch and he finally had the ability to kind of like buckle down and do the things that needed to be done. So, yeah, unfortunately, my farm upbringing sounds like it was very different than your farm upbringing.
When was it that you went in? What year?
It was 2008 when I went in.
Okay, so rolling back a little bit then, what was 9/11 through your eyes?
I was a senior in high school taking college courses at our junior college when 9/11 happened. And I woke up the morning of September 11th and the news was everywhere. The first tower had just been hit right when I woke up. So everyone was just trying to think, it was kind of like, hey, it's a freak incident. And then all of a sudden it happened again and again. And then it was, this is definitely something that was planned. And I, like everybody else, was definitely caught up in the emotion surrounding all of those things. And I knew that I'd already made the choice that I wanted to go into the Navy. And I initially had this urge to just go and enlist right then and right there. I think I'm fortunate that I didn't make that emotional decision because I had a very, very good career. And I don't actually think it could have been any better. And all that just came down to the timing of when I did finally get to go in post college.
So where were you first assigned then? Where was your first deployment?
My first deployment was with Team 7 out in Coronado, and it went back and forth. When we first started our workup, it was going to be Iraq, and then it was someplace undisclosed location in the Middle East, and then it was back to Iraq, and then we went to Afghanistan for almost 11 months, which was much longer deployment than normal. But the community made this decision that they wanted to try to get both coasts kind of back in sync with each other as far as our deployment cycles. And what that meant was our team, Team 7, and the East Coast team that was our counterpart, Team 10, we're going to have to do a longer deployment to get everybody back on cycle, which, hey, we loved it. 11 months in Afghanistan is exactly where we wanted to be. That's where everybody in the SEAL teams wanted to go during that time frame.
So the first question that I always ask people, and I preface this, for everyone else at home, we get a very polarized view of war. Either stack bodies, let God sort them out, or they're all baby killers. And in the middle, obviously, are the men and women that, go overseas with our flag on their shoulder and go protect our homeland and the people that are in that particular country as well. Two-part question. The first part, regardless of the politics or incidents that sent you, and this can be any of the places you were deployed, sent you overseas, was there a moment where you realized that there were some horrendous people that did need to be taken care of?
Yes, absolutely. Like very quickly. Our mission was what we call village stability operations. And it was typically, historically, it was more of a special forces, Army special forces. So when we say Army Green Berets or Special Forces, that's the same thing. The Green Beret is like their nickname. That's because based off of the beret that they get awarded. So that's typically an Army Special Forces mission. At the time, basically any SOF unit that was going over to Afghanistan was expected to conduct that type of mission. So what that means is we were living in a village with the villagers inside of a certain, area, province, region of Afghanistan. And our job was to provide security to those villagers who'd been suffering under the control of the Taliban and these different insurgent forces, and build security up for them, help them build their own security apparatus like a local police force, first responder force. And then the theory behind that was, the strategy behind that was, you take all of these provincial village police forces that are getting formed up, put them underneath a local governance, and now you've got like a police force that each province can own and run to provide their own security. So we were living in a village with these villagers for 11 months. And the things that we saw when we first got there, because we did a very good job of clearing the bad guys out pretty quickly, the things that we first saw when you got over there was just complete and total oppression of the civilian population. Everything was handled basically through the Taliban courts and the Taliban law system, which surprisingly enough, if you listen to villagers, has some positives, but mostly negatives. The positives was it was better than like no system of law. The negatives were they were very antiquated punishment, shall we say. But it was basically, you're going to do whatever we tell you to do. And if you don't do that, then, we're going to torture, kill you and your families. So they were basically just living under this constant state of fear when we got there. And then, Afghanistan was one thing, and that was bad enough. My last tour, I was a troop commander at Team 5, and I took my whole team, or not my whole team, my team headquarters and my troop of 5 platoons went over to Iraq in 2016 and led the Battle of Mosul to push ISIS out of Mosul and eventually push them out of Iraq. And I will say this without getting into too much detail: there has never been a more brutal or barbaric regime on the face of the earth than ISIS. And regardless of what allowed them to come into power in the first place, they don't belong on the same earth as everybody else does. And I was very proud of my troop and my team and all the Americans that were over there, the part that they played in getting rid of those individuals and giving Iraq back to the people.
This is always an interesting perspective when someone's fought in multiple, countries. What do you think is the common denominator, bearing in mind that we all are born as these, little bundles of joy, and then with these giggling toddlers, and then one day, beheading people? What if you're able to kind of identify it as a common denominator that seems to spawn such evil and hatred in what were once innocent young children?
Man, this is sketchy. So at the root of it, without going into anything else, it's ideology. And then the ability of certain leaders underneath that ideology to present a corrupted form of that ideology, or let's say the worst form of that ideology, and then to harness those feelings underneath that ideology and point them in a certain direction, which is towards the West. That's the common denominator of every area that I saw, whether it was Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, any of those places.
What about poverty? Because I hear this a lot. Afghanistan, for example, you've got the people and they're paid to join the Taliban because they just simply want to feed their family, and which is obviously then kind of amplifying the effect.
I think there's definitely a part of that, and I would say that probably plays a large piece. And if you would wind the clock back 15 years, I think most people would say that's the biggest part. ISIS threw a big wrench in that because there was very wealthy, very well-to-do people coming from all over the planet, to include Europe, to include America, to go get under the banner of this ideology. So if you would have asked me in 2009, I would have said poverty is probably the main driver. I don't say that anymore based off of what I saw.
I mentioned it was a two-part question, and this is the other side that we just don't hear in the media here. But I've heard so many beautiful examples. Again, you can pick the battlefield. What were the moments of kindness and compassion that you remember, whether it was obviously our own people or the people that you were protecting?
Yeah, look, the kids in every single village that you go to, they're kids. They're trying to live a normal life. Their parents want them to live a normal life. um, we were able to build a couple of schools in our province where we were in Afghanistan, the first schools that were there. And to me, that was like one of my favorite memories ever, was getting the honor through the village had this big ceremony for us, and I got to lay the cornerstone of the first school that we built there. And then after the school was built, from our fob, we could see kids going to school in the morning, um, doing their walk to school, doing their walk back to school. And I would say this: outside of the individuals that fell underneath that ideology, um, they're human beings. They want the same thing that we want, whether it was in Afghanistan, whether it was in Iraq, whether it was in Somalia or some of these other areas. They want to be left alone. They want to be able to live their life in their village with their families. They want to be able to raise their kids the way that any parent would want to raise their kids. And there's always that common denominator that runs through things. Unfortunately, in some of these different areas across the globe, they don't have what we have in the West, especially in America, which is the freedom to do those things.
So, what about transition? What made you decide that you wanted to transition out? And then, as we've heard many, many times, that can be a struggle for many people in uniform between the tribe and the purpose and the identity. What was your initial transition experience?
Yeah, my plan was to be in that uniform till I was like 95 years old initially. My transition was based off of a couple of different factors. The biggest factor, the main driving factor, was my family. So my wife and I had 5 kids by the end of my last tour. And when your kids are young, it's still a big toll on them, but it's very different when you're deploying and you've got a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old than it is when you have a newborn. Just because the impact on them of their father not being there is huge, and the impact on me of not getting to be there and watch my kids go through these different stages of life was starting to really weigh on me. And the real genesis of what got me thinking about getting out, and this first incident that I'm going to tell you about happened about 2 years before I actually made the decision, was my commanding officer at Team 5, that tour that we went to Iraq, was just an awesome leader, a guy named Beef. Jason was his master chief. So Jason and Beef ran the team. Um, Beef was an awesome CO. He sat me down during our kind of our detailing talk of where do you want to go next. And he's like, hey, you're at 8 years right now. Let's map out the next 12 years. Let's get you to 20. I want you to write down every job that you want, like your dream job, your number one job for the next 20 years. So I was like, oh, I want to go to the training command and run the training command. And then I want to go and I want to be, a commanding officer of Team 5. And then I want to do this. And he goes, okay, awesome, great. Now, right underneath each of those tours, write how old your kids are going to be. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. No one's ever done that with me before. So I started writing down, and it was like almost a knife in the heart, because what I realized was when I hit 20, my oldest son would be 18 years old. So if I chose to retire at 20, what that means is now I have time to spend with my family, and my oldest son is going to be gone within a matter of months. And then a year and change behind him, my second son is going to be out of the house. And then I started to look at these tours on the paper and go, how much does that mean to me versus how much does my family mean to me? The other thing that I was very fortunate with that made this decision very easy for me was I had done everything that I ever could have imagined in the SEAL teams. I got to do an awesome assistant platoon commander tour, right into my platoon commander tour. I got to go and run a phase of our selection pipeline. I came back and had the best troop commander tour I could possibly have at Team 5. I got to stay at Team 5 for another tour, and then I was given the privilege and opportunity to run our training command. And I had ticked every box that I ever possibly could have wanted to tick, and I had no regrets whatsoever about my career. So I made the decision to get out after the running the training command, and it was the best decision I've ever made. And when we talk about the transition for me, and I know there's a lot of people that struggle with this, for me, it was not difficult. It was very difficult for me to make the decision to step away because, a lot of my desire was still to serve in uniform and be around the caliber of individuals that I was fortunate enough to be around. But I had things on the outside. So a lot of guys, when they get out, they haven't cultivated anything else outside of the teams. They've cultivated no relationships. They haven't cultivated a family. And if they have a family, some guys haven't really been pouring the time and investment that they need into their wives and their kids. So they get out and there's not really this stable life at home. And now it creates all of these different issues. Or they get out and they don't have a family to lean on. They don't have any other friends to lean on. And now they're feeling isolated and alone. For me, when I was a very young guy, my identity was as a SEAL in the SEAL teams. When I got married, my identity primarily became a husband. When I started having kids, my identity became a father. And I only ever had two goals for my life. I wanted to be a good SEAL and I wanted to be a good father. So at some point in time, those two things started to intersect and affect my ability to do both. So I made the decision to do the number one priority, which is hopefully be a good dad. And because I had my family here and I had been investing in them and cultivating them with as much time as I possibly could, my transition was pretty easy. The other thing I had was I was going to work for a bunch of team guys. So I didn't have to try to make this shift into a corporate world that I was really unfamiliar with, and maybe the culture was different. I was also very fortunate to go and work with individuals that were very like-minded in an industry that I really believed in.
What was that industry?
So the first industry was a construction technology startup that was founded by two of my former teammates from the SEAL teams, to include my best friend, a guy named Garrett, who's one of the greatest leaders I've ever met, and just the best person you've ever met. James, he's someone that you want to hate because he's just better at you at everything, but you can't because he's also better than you at just being the nicest, most humble person you've ever met. So he started this company about the same time as I was getting out, and he asked me if I would help him start it up. And I came on board with him, and I was asked to be the COO of that. And we helped grow and scale that company for a couple of years. And then I had the opportunity to go and join the awesome team at Echelon Front, the leadership consultancy and training that was a company that was founded by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. So I went from working with awesome guys in the SEAL teams to working with an awesome team and company at the construction technology company to now working with an awesome team at Echelon Front, where I get to go around and meet amazing Americans, and not just Americans, it's a global company now, amazing individuals who are just trying to be the best, most effective leaders that they can possibly be.
How many years did you have total in the military?
13 and a half. And that's combined active duty, and then I stayed in the reserves for about a year.
So I have 14 years in the fire service, and
awesome.
It was just a crazy twist of fate where the universe spit me out and said, you need to go outside the walls now and try and help the profession as a whole. I didn't ever think that it was going to be that short, but it's interesting because, if you do 14 years, 13 years in the military, people are like, wow, that's amazing. Thank you for your service. But if you do it in the first responder professions, they're like, well, why did you quit? Totally different lens. But this is
Yeah,
what I've tried to storytell. And again, I love the job. I didn't leave because I didn't want to run the calls anymore. It was the opposite. I was just tired of burying my friends. But um,
yeah.
I tell people, and I love that mentorship that you had with lay out what you want and lay out how old your kids are, because it is the same in the first responder profession, especially as I know we're going to get to when we're talking about work weeks and extra shifts away. There is no greater, more important currency than time with your children or time with your family. I believe that hand on my heart. If we just, if you're just a firefighter, if you're just a SEAL and there's nothing else in your life, then what is it really for? Like ultimately, I'm protecting my community, which would be hoping that someone else is protecting, where I live and my children and my family. But understanding that there is a balance, and when there's that shift where your identity becomes more important than your family, or you have this kind of bizarre mythology you tell yourself that you being worked into the ground as a firefighter is an honorable thing, when it's not. Being a firefighter is an honorable thing. The work week, the way that you're worked and kept from your family, is another entire discussion. But I really love that lens and that story that you told, which is always be, putting your finger on the pulse of what matters the most. And if there's a shift, that's when maybe you need to have a conversation, because the only reason that we work 25 years is because a pension company told you that's when you would have accrued amount of money. That's it. It's
Hmm.
nothing to do with the burning desire in your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was fortunate. My first platoon chief, that guy that I told you about that put me through selection, he had 6 kids. So my first glance at what's possible in the SEAL teams was this chief, who, by the way, was the Pacific Fleet Sailor of the Year. So that's not a SEAL team honor. That's the entire Pacific Fleet, which is like 100,000 plus sailors. He was the Pacific Fleet Sailor of the Year. So not only was he an outstanding father and husband, but he was the best sailor in the Pacific Fleet. So my example was, oh, it's possible to do both of those things. But there is definitely a sacrifice. Like, your family is making a huge sacrifice, because it's not like he could drop everything and just go home if there was an issue at any given time. So your family is getting pulled into that same thing. But that mentorship that he provided me, that lens of like, your family is the most important thing, and the mentorship that Beef provided me of like, hey, let's look at not just your career, but like, what are you putting your family through during this, is huge. And it's not that they're not intertwined either. If your family life is a mess, there's a 0% chance that does not bleed over into your work life in some way, shape, or form. And it's idiotic to think that you can completely compartmentalize this giant dumpster fire that you have over here, and it's not going to affect this profession that you say that you care about so much. And whether you're in the military, whether you're in the firefighter first responder service, my personal philosophy is that if you are a man, your ultimate responsibility, your ultimate role is to be a father, and that can look different ways. I'm blessed to be a father with 5 kids. Some guys, through no fault of their own, they're never going to have a family, but there's ways they can fill that role of fatherhood. They can be a mentor to someone underneath them, like my chief was, and like my commanding officer was. They can be a coach. They can be an advocate, like you are, for an entire community. So whether you have a family or not, there's a role that you need to fill outside of this very small thing that you're doing that is very important, but in the grand scheme of things, it's definitely not the most important.
I couldn't agree more. Speaking of advocating, I know you were on Mike Ritland's podcast. He was on here years and years ago. I actually need to get him back on. But I saw in one of the clips that you were talking about the withdrawal and trying to get some of the people that you work with out. I just had an Army veteran, Dewey Yop, on talking about this very thing. You and the men and women that you serve alongside are in this country for basically 20 years. There's this incredible selflessness and heroism of the indigenous people as well. Talk to me about the withdrawal itself, and then the human impact of some of the people that you cared about.
Yeah. It's the most disappointed I've ever been in our country when that happened. Because anyone who had spent time on the ground in Afghanistan could tell you exactly what was going to happen if we pulled out, when we pulled out, in the fashion that we pulled out. Now, if someone wanted to get into a debate about whether we should still have been there or not, maybe we could talk about different ways to scale down that would have looked differently. But anyone that spent time over there could have looked at that plan and just said, this is ridiculous. And we can tell you exactly what's going to happen if you do this. And the reason it was so disheartening and disappointing to all of the different veterans that had served over there is we saw the cost of 20 years of sustained conflict over there, not just in lost brothers and sisters, but the cost to the population as well. Those people were put through hell for 20 years, not just, the oppression of the Taliban, but war takes a toll on the innocent civilian side as well. And their whole society was thrown into this upheaval. And you had really brave Afghanis that in a lot of ways is like the most brave thing I've ever seen, which is they put their neck on the line to help out American forces. And, we had in our camp, we had multiple Afghanis who teamed up with us to help us push the Taliban out. And we had multiple Afghanis acting as interpreters for us, going on some patrols with us to point different things out. And we knew that if we pulled out and the country was turned back over to the Taliban, exactly what was going to happen to those individuals, which is exactly what happened to those individuals, which is why you see people desperate enough to cling to the wheel of a C-17 as it's taking off into the stratosphere, knowing that they're going to die, but knowing that that death is probably a lot better way to go than what's going to happen if the Taliban gets a hold of them. So it wasn't just this sense of disgust of like a waste of the time that we spent over there and the lives that we spent over there, American lives we spent over there, coalition lives we spent over there, Afghani lives we spent over there. For me, it was also a sense of disgust of what was going to happen to the population of Afghanistan, which is exactly what happened.
I've asked this question to so many people have been on here because this is the voice that we need to hear. We know now, in hindsight, for example, that some of the things that people were told about Iraq now weren't true. And it doesn't downplay the impact that our allied soldiers had whilst they were there. And I've heard many, many stories. But, there's a responsibility of when to go to war and when not to go to war. Understanding, though, that there are companies that make billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars when we are at war, with your kind of 2026 lens now, and I think the comparison is when you make billions and trillions of dollars on sick Americans, where's the push to make Americans healthy? It's the same, and it worries me with the war. Where are the checks and balances to make sure that we only send our young men and women overseas when all other diplomacy has failed?
The honest answer is I don't know. I think that we're much more aware and cognizant of that now than we were 20 years ago when the decision was made. And I think that's probably true if you look historically back to any conflict. I'd be willing to bet that right after the conflict is over, there's this desire to make sure that we don't allow it to happen again, that we don't send American forces and coalition forces into a conflict that we shouldn't be involved in, or into a conflict needlessly. And I would probably say, again, if you look historically, that we failed to do that again and again. And I not unfortunately, I don't think that leaders should be judged by their intent. I think they should be judged by the outcome of their decisions. So if you look at the leaders that were in place when the decision to go in Iraq was made, I don't know if their intent in going in there was pure or not. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter if it was or not, because the outcome is what the outcome is. So I would hope that we have these checks and balances in place. But what I've learned from observing leaders at every single level of the military, corporations, our government, is that it takes good leaders or a good leader to be that check and balance. If that person is not willing to do that, or several people are not willing to do that, bad decisions will be made. Case in point, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You can't tell me that there's not every single general in that room that signed off on that plan, whether they agreed with it or not, but that signed off on it, didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And every single one of them should have had to resign in shame for putting their name on that. Because what a real leader would have done would have been to take the 4 stars off of their shoulder and say, I'm not supporting this. Here's my resignation if this is your plan. But nobody did it. I think that same thing is probably how we get involved in conflicts that we should not be involved in.
No, I agree completely. And I see even in my profession, when there are solutions to a lot of these problems now, but there's an absence of moral courage. And what kills me with the example that you've just given, because none of those generals are, in Kabul when this is happening. And the same with my profession. We have people refusing to make the decisions that will drive change, that will reverse the mental health crisis, the physical health crisis, the recruitment crisis, the retention crisis, et cetera, who work 40 hours a week. They go home at 5 every night. They go back to their family. They shrug their shoulders and they go, well, it's not my problem. And I don't understand how you develop such a disconnect. And honestly, to be completely blunt, the only thing that I can really come up with is we talk about mental health in the fire service. And I would say that was a mental health issue. If you as a leader are burying your own people or stopping them from going home to their family because of your poor management decisions, and you are sleeping well at night, you really need to look in the mirror and see if you're actually fit for duty.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had this conversation with a friend of mine who's at development group right now, and he was talking about the fact that the CEO of all of development group, he saw him in the hallway and just had to pull him aside and just tell him, "Hey, sir, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing. I think that you're killing it in your role." And he's like, "The reason I told him that is because the guy has not left his office in like 3 weeks, because that's the op tempo that he's expecting the command to go through right now based off of world events, and he's not willing to not pay that same price for him." And I think if you had more leaders with that mentality, it would probably be a little bit different. And you look at there's a fascinating book in the worst possible way called The Generals, and it's basically a profile of American generalship all the way up from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, first Gulf War, and then into the War on Terror. And it's a profile in the decline in the ability or capability of our generals. When you look at World War I and World War II, hands down, we had the best general level officers. That means Army, admirals in the Navy. We had the best general level leadership on the planet of any military. And then since then, it's been a steady decline. And I would argue one of the reasons is if you were a general in World War I or World War II, up even into the Marine Corps in Korea, you were in the field with your troops. Now, you probably weren't on the front line, which is not where you should be, but you were in the field and you had your finger on the pulse of what was going on with your people, and you were sharing that burden with them. The further and further they'd get disconnected from that, it doesn't matter if they have the best of intentions and they're, a solid leader. You just can't replicate that scenario of living with them and seeing what they're going through and sharing a level of that with them.
Why has that dynamic changed?
Well, according to the book and according to things that I've seen too, it went from a privilege to be in that role to almost like a good old boys club, where once you got in there, you were kind of a made man. It's kind of like being a tenured professor. The Marine Corps has held off on that the longest, and I would argue the Marine Corps still has the best corps of general level officers in the American military, maybe the world. But it became kind of a club where you were protected once you got in there. Our supreme allied, or the commander of all U.S. forces in the Second World War, fired like 60% of generals. 60% of generals. Now, just because you got fired didn't mean you were kicked out. He knew his generals well enough to understand their strengths and weaknesses. So he might go, "Hey, Sean, you just turned out you really weren't that good of a tactical general. So I'm going to pull you out of the field because you have a mind for plans. And I'm going to use you as a general in our planning department to help plan the next phase of this campaign." Or, "James, logistics, you kind of suck at it, man. But you know what? You are piss and vinegar, and I'm going to put you out on the front line, like leading troops." And he would use them to the best of their abilities. But if they weren't getting the job done, he fired them. And why did he fire them? Because he cares more about the guys on the ground than he does about this general. That doesn't mean he doesn't care about the general, but he knows what it's all about. And I think we've lost that mentality. Matter of fact, I know we've lost that mentality.
Yeah, yeah, and again, I can just see it in my mind now, and in my profession as well. And to your point, 40% were phenomenal. Same in the fire service. We have some great fire service leaders. Fire service leaders, and law enforcement and EMS specifically. But the damage that the wrong person can do, that is more concerned about their own political path or career ladder than the people that serve under them. I mean, as I've said, and it's raw, but it's true. Our graveyards are full of those.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And then the last thing that compounds that too is when you get to a certain level of generalship, part of your job is to also, unfortunately, be a politician, because you are interacting and liaisoning with policy and different groups. So that has to help muddy the waters too of where their real focus should be.
What about, as you look back now over your military career specifically, whether it's yourself or people you were around, what were some of the biggest leadership mistakes, and then what was some of the most powerful mentors that you had in that role? Obviously, you mentioned Beef. I mean, just what he did with your career
Yeah,
was a perfect example.
absolutely. Look, the biggest leadership mistake that anybody can be is to lack humility. I mean, there's not even one that's a close second, because it opens the door to all of these different pitfalls that aren't just going to affect you, but they're going to affect everybody around you. And hey, if you're a leader in a corporation and you lack humility, you're going to make bad decisions, and that's going to affect people's livelihood. And that's a terrible thing. If you are a leader who lacks humility in the first responder world or in the military, your lack of humility could result in people getting killed, which is the ultimate sin of a leader. When you lack you're going to make mistakes. There's no part of your job description as a leader that says you can never make a mistake. Like, that's an unreal expectation. What we expect of leaders is that when they make a mistake, they have the humility to analyze that mistake, to own that mistake, and to fix that mistake and not do it again going forward. The other thing that's really damaging about not having humility is you think you have it all figured out, and you don't ask the opinions of people around you. No, we don't expect leaders in the military, in the civilian sector, in the first responder world. We don't expect you to have all the answers. That's also not realistic. But we do expect you to find the answer. And how do I do that? Well, James, if I'm your leader and you're a chief in my platoon and you've got 16 years of tactical experience, and I'm struggling to solve this problem, I should go and I should ask you, "Hey, James, what have you seen, man? What am I missing here that you're seeing? Have you seen this problem before? In your experience and your expertise, what would you do to fix this problem or address this problem?" And that takes a tremendous amount of humility. And leaders that won't do those things, it causes this chain reaction up and down the chain of command. The opposite of that is true as well, as far as like the best traits is a leader who has their ego in check. And look, having an ego is not a bad thing in and of itself. I would not have been in the SEAL teams if I didn't have an ego that was driving me and pushing me to accomplish that goal. You probably would not have made it as far as you have in your career if you didn't have an ego motivating you and pushing you to be a professional and to be the best that you can be. But that ego can get out of control and cause all kinds of problems. And the best leaders that I worked for and the best leaders that I saw come through training when I was running training were the leaders that were humble, that listened to people around them, that used the ideas of the people around them, that empowered the people around them, and could own up to a mistake when they made a mistake.
You mentioned about training. It's funny because that's where, I've seen the poor training in my profession is when you go, you're expected to do it once correctly, they check a box, and then that's it. And if you don't do it correctly, you say you didn't do it correctly, they still check a box, and then you go. The good training, there's multiple layers to it, and you're set up to fail. And then they're like, all right, what would you do the next time? Okay, let's try it again. And so now the training ground is exactly where the mistakes are made. So hopefully on the fire ground, or the extrication site, whatever it is, now hopefully things are going to go right, or we've got plan B and plan C because we train that way. Before we hit record, you talked about training in your profession and actually having a unique perspective on the impact of sleep deprivation on the performance of these high level warfighters. So I'll give you the microphone, knowing how passionate I am about this topic.
Yeah. In the military, we love to, well, at least in the SEAL teams, we love to sleep deprive people. It's not that we do it out of this sense of, wanting to torture people or make people miserable. It's a part of the job. Like, you're going to go overseas and deploy if there's a war going on, and there are going to be times have to push through and just stay awake for 24, 48 hours based on the needs of the mission. So we're trying to get people used, one, to the realization that they can push themselves, and two, that at some point in time in their career, they're going to be called upon to do that. Hell Week, which is a part of the initial selection pipeline, it's 6 days of nonstop physical activity where they're going to get no more than 2.5 hours of sleep over a 6-day period. So that's not each night. That's no more than 2.5 hours of sleep over a 6-day period. When I was running training and when I was going through training, we replicate these periods of having to just push through at a high op tempo. And how we do that is we have these events that we call field training exercises, or FTXs for short. And an FTX is as close to a real world operation as we can get in a training environment. So we're trying to replicate real world environments. There's a mission planning cycle. They're going to get aircraft and helicopters and jets and all these different assets to take out there. We're going to give them these really complex problems. They're going to have to plan how they're going to do it, plan for contingencies, and then they're going to have to go out there and execute. And then as soon as they're done with that, we give them another one and another one and another one. And we do this for 3 to 5 nights in a row. Over the course of that 3 to 5 nights, leaders are getting almost no sleep. And what we saw replicated again and again and again, and we have some data to back this up because we have some sleep scientists that came out prior to my time running the training command to kind of collect this data, is that high performing individuals can function at a pretty normal level for about 48 hours. And then when they hit that 48 hours, it's not this gradual slope of decrease in performance. It's a cliff. It's a straight dive off of that cliff where their cognitive and their physical abilities just plummet. So what we learned is if someone has to push themselves, and there's a time where you're like, look, guys, we just have to push through because we have this multi-day operation that we have to go on. We know that the limit where we can expect our guys to function at their normal ability is no more than 48 hours. And if something is going to cause us to go past that 48 hours, we understand we're taking a significant risk, and that risk has to go into our mission planning, into our risk mitigation to ensure that we're keeping everybody safe. So now you look at career that's defined by these cycles of like, just push for 48 hours in perpetuity and you'll be totally fine. And when we do these FTXs, there's a lot of time and space in between these FTXs. There's like a month and a half in between these FTXs. We're not asking them to do this back to back to back to back over a 20, 25 year career. So I can only imagine the effect that that's having on people long term. And the thing about it that we've learned is you don't get better at this. This is not like a stress that you can get better at. Managing stress in a kill house, I can get better at by doing more runs and increasing my skill in the kill house. Managing my stress level when I'm jumping out of an airplane, I can get better at because I can get more proficient in that skill and I can conduct more jumps, which lowers my stress reaction to that environment. Your stress reaction and the effects of these 48-hour cycles does not get any better. It's not like after 3 weeks of those, all of a sudden your body learns to function for 72 hours or 96 hours. That's not how it works. It's just a steady cliff that has long lasting impacts.
It's really interesting because it was literally a seal that opened my eyes to this whole thing. It was Kirk Parsley.
Yeah. Yeah.
And listening to him, talk initially, and this was like 10 years ago now, listening to him on the original Barbell Shrug podcast. And then they were talking about it from a sports specific point of view. But the backstory, where they were running these ops like the old way, and he was doing all the blood work, and it was all like 80-year-old women. He's like, what the hell? These are Navy SEALs. And then reframing everything for the rest and recovery. And I've since then said, to my profession, well, think about it. Sleep deprivation is used deliberately for three things: special forces, special operations selection, like Hell Week, interrogation, and torture. That's it. None of those are high performance. They're breaking people down. And so to your point, yeah, if you've got a 48-hour, op that you're pushing through and then you have this long rest and recovery, well, that's one thing. But one of the shift schedules that the West Coast loves a lot is 48 on, 96 off, which means that you actually only have 3 days, because that third of those 3 days you work from that midnight to the morning, which is not enough time to recover. But then, as you mentioned, you times that by 10, 15, 20, 25 years, there's a cumulative drop off each time. So I would argue, using your model, that the brand new person maybe could push through to 48. 10 years in, I would guarantee you it's probably degraded down to 24 if you're lucky. So we've got this step down as well. So getting them to understand that if you're going to be 24, which I think that's the kind of accepted one, we have a place to sleep, changing the days and nights, we know that doesn't work. I mean, look at police and, ERs, they're not exactly epitome of health. But after that 24, you've got to forge enough rest and recovery to get back to zero for the next 24, which is this 24/72 that I talk about all the time. And, Florida has been leaning into, and surprise, surprise, it works. People are happy and healthy again.
Yeah, crazy how when you listen to all of the things that we know about the importance of sleep, crazy how things just tend to fall into place. For our community, it is a fine balance, because there are going to be times where guys are going to go overseas and the tempo is going to be something where they have to push themselves. So it's important for guys to understand that they can, but it's also important for leaders to understand that that's not sustainable and it's a time and a place. And if our expectation is that they're doing that again and again and again and again, all you're doing is you're taking this really expensive, really high performing individual and you're slowly degrading them over an entire career. And then you look at, the impacts outside of just the work itself. You work a 48-hour shift. Do you think you're getting good quality family time in that 24 hours when you come off of that shift? Or do you think you're kind of like a zombie, dead to the world, need to recover? So now you're talking about extra stressors that are compounding in here. And so it's not just like the impact on the job itself. There's a lot more things that you have to look at.
100%. Well, let's walk to Echelon Front. So firstly, how did you find yourself working with Jocko and Leif?
Yeah, so Jocko put me through my first workup. So I've known him, and Leif was my first leadership instructor in the SEAL teams. He was running our junior officer training course when I was going through selection. So I had like at least a peripheral relationship with both of those individuals. And Jason Gardner was he was a troop chief when I first checked into Team 7. So that's where I met him first. When I was running our third phase of BUDS later in my career, my next move was going to be a troop commander. And Jason was going to Team 5 to be the command master chief of Team 5 with Beef. And I reached out to him about coming over to Team 5. And he put in a good word for me to Beef. And I ended up over at Team 5 with him. After he finished up that tour, he went to the training command and he was the command master chief of the training command. And then after my tours at Team 5, I ended up over with Jason running the training command again, which is why I joke that Jason was put in place to babysit me everywhere that I went and make sure I didn't get into too much trouble. Well, Jason retired after 30 years of service and went to work for Echelon Front, and he loved every second of it. So when he found out, when I talked to him and told him I made the decision to get out, he was like, "Hey man, you would be an awesome addition to this team, and you would love this work." So he put in a good word with Jocko. I sat down with Jocko, and we just kind of talked about that possibility. I was initially going to go on board with Echelon Front right after I got out of the SEAL teams, but my friend Garrett approached me and asked me if I would help him. And I went to Jocko to kind of get his advice, and he's like, "Hey man, you would be dumb not to do this. You know, you'll get a chance to build a great company. You'll get to learn a whole bunch about leadership in a different capacity, about the startup world, about the corporate sector. And then whenever you want, we're here for you. And you can come and work for us, and you'll just be more of an asset for Echelon because now you'll have leadership experience at all these different tiers." So when we made the decision, and the reason we left the construction tech company was we just made the decision to move out of California, which is where the tech company was stationed. So the day that I stopped working for Garrett, I went on board with Jocko and Leif at Echelon Front, all thanks to a good advocate who advocated for me throughout my career in Jason Gardner.
So
But don't tell him I said that.
I'm sure he's listening. So now, you come from this long military background. You had an exposure on the corporate side as well. A lot of people from the first responder professions, arguably a lot of people in chief positions, are attending, the musters and some of the other, events that you guys put on. What was your first impression of just what that looked like? I'm not going to be very specific, but what that diverse landscape of these personalities that are the helm of these large organizations.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about the first responder community in general, what I would say is just talk to me when I go and work with you guys, for the love of Pete. They're like, it's super hard to get them to open up at first. Um, Once they get rocking and rolling and we start to have these really good discussions around leadership and what it means to be a part of a team, um, everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to be a part of an organization, whether it's first responders or a high performing team in the corporate environment. Everybody wants to be a part of a team that they feel like is making a difference, and they feel like they can use their talents and their abilities to help that organization make a difference. And I would say that's the common thread that I've seen, regardless of the endeavor, whether it's the military, whether it's first responders, whether it's corporations. They're full of people who genuinely want to do, for the most part, who genuinely want to perform, who genuinely want to do their best and help support the people around them. And unfortunately, a lot of times when people are not allowed to do that, or they get disenfranchised or burn out, has nothing to do with their desire and almost everything to do with the people that are in charge of them.
When I was talking to Jocko in our first conversation, obviously ownership is a big thing. And I pointed out to him in that particular department I was working for that the chain of command only had about 4 or 5 rungs. And if that top rung grooms the next rung, then you're in this kind of vicious cycle. And you can, at your own level, have extreme ownership and try and be a positive influence from whatever rank that you're in at the time. But sometimes you're just in this environment that is, very, very toxic. And, like in my particular example, it was walking out and fixing it from the outside that was ultimately the solution that I went with. What are some of the challenges that you're hearing from these people in these positions that do have the heart for it, and what are some of the success stories? What are some of the takeaways from Echelon Front's mentorship that is actually having an actionable change in some of these departments?
Yeah, look, when you're talking in general about being a part of a team that maybe is not being led very well, and it's causing issues and friction down the chain of command, and you're feeling like you don't have a lot of ability to affect the chain of command, the reason is, in some cases, you don't have a lot of ability to affect the chain of command. Now, we could talk a lot about strategies for having a better relationship, which means that you have more influence, picking and choosing your battles, so that when you do choose to make something a concern or bring something up, you're not the boy who cried wolf over and over again. But I would see the same kind of paradigm in the military, especially when I was running the training command, because I was putting every platoon on the West Coast through their training functions. And we had good leaders and we had bad leaders, from a team level all the way down to a platoon level. And what I would tell people that feel like maybe they're stuck in that cycle of not having a lot of influence in the negative environment is, good teams can absolutely overcome bad leadership, but you have to be focused on the right things. If you're focused on the bad leadership, nothing is going to change. You're going to get burnt out. You're going to get frustrated. Those frustrations are probably going to bleed into your day-to-day interactions with your teammates and cause friction. But if you're take the energy that you are using focusing on the thing that you can't change, and you focus it on trying to ensure that you're building the best team that you possibly can with the people around you, and you're looking out for each other and supporting the people to your left and to your right, a lot of good things can happen. And I could give you example after example of platoons that were not led well, but it was no factor because the guys in the platoon were focused on getting the job done and supporting each other. And in doing that and putting the mission first and the team first, they were still able to be really effective. I also saw times where there were bad leaders, bad platoon commander, bad platoon chief, bad troop commander, and the platoon was horrible. And the reason the platoon was horrible is because they were focused on the thing that they can't change and not focused on what they could control and what they could own. So if you're in that scenario, you got one of two choices. Option one is leave. Look, that's a huge decision. That's a huge decision that might affect not just you, but people that depend on you for support to provide for them, your family. There's a lot of good. You're a perfect case in point, and sometimes outsized good that can happen by making a move like that. But if you're in this scenario and you're like, well, nothing I'm doing is working, ultimately you have one choice, which is to leave and find something else to do. The other choice is to own the things that you can own, which is your performance, your ability to keep the focus on the mission, your ability to support the people around you, and influence the people around you to do the same thing. And I would argue, from my experience, from what I've seen, and also from having a tour or two where I wasn't led the best in the SEAL teams and had some of those experiences, is if you can focus on the people around you and supporting them and getting the mission done, and not spend your time worrying about the things that you can't control, things get better. Doesn't mean things are going to be perfect, but things will absolutely get better.
One thing that I've seen as well is I think our profession is just so underslept and overworked that the ability to critically think diminishes rapidly. And so, for example, they're so hell bent on banging heads with the union, the administration, the city, the county, whoever it is, that sometimes they can't see that actually the solution that fixes all things is right in front of them. But you have to repair these relationships. And where in Florida, where these departments have really moved forward, massive respect to all the people in those positions because they've done that. They're like, look, enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just sit down. Let's just talk about this. And I'll give Plano, Texas a shout out. They sat down and in one day hashed out how to completely revolutionize their work week. Because as you said, humility, they left all their egos out the door. Pasco County in Florida, another good example. So this is what I think another thing is, rather than having this constant headbanging with these groups because he wears bugles or that person's a politician, but actually taking a step back. But what is the solution in the front? What is the thing that works that we can do as a team? And then, in this particular example with the work week and the recruitment and crisis and the retention crisis, the answer is the same. The overtime money wastage is the same exact thing, but it's a false economy to work the people the way they do. You have to invest money up front, and that will save hand over fist on the way down. So now all we're really left with is egos, because it's someone going, you know what? We were wrong. Just the ability to say we were wrong. Let's start doing something different. I think is it. If we could just implant that into someone's head, so all the egos settle down, they actually look at the spreadsheet the way it's supposed to be seen, and here's the money that's downstream, and here's how it costs to put these extra people, and if we took that from there and put it there, then boom, now we're in a much better place. The solutions are there, but I see that people, like I said, they're so tired, they're in some cases so angry that they literally can't see the wood for the trees anymore.
Yeah, ego is the number one killer in business and in life. And like we talked about earlier, if you are the person in charge and you're leading with that ego, it's going to have terrible effects for your entire organization. And there's nothing that gets better by having a frictional relationship with someone. Nothing is going to get solved. Nothing is going to get better by that. So, the number one leadership principle that we teach as a company is relationships. And we teach it through this lens of teamwork. And when we say teamwork, what we mean is like the entire organization. So it's not just my platoon, it's all of Team 5. In actuality, it's all of Naval Special Warfare. But if I'm focused on just my platoon and I'm not building relationships with Team 10 or Team 7 right across the hall from us, then I'm letting these silos pop up in between us. And when there's silos in our organization, we're not communicating, we're not sharing best practices, I'm not learning from them, they're not learning from me. And what usually happens is those egos get involved and we start to compete against each other. And we start to look at our own teammates, the people that we should be on this journey together with, we start to look at them as like our competition or a barrier to our success somehow. And when you've got leadership in the firehouse that can't play nice with the union or the city because of their ego, that's going to affect every single person. And look, everybody in that, triangle of three that we just talked about, they all want the same thing. Ideally, at the end, they all want the same thing. So if we can focus on the things that we're aligned on, then we can start to talk about the tactics to get that result in the best way. But if we can't focus on the thing that we're aligned on, if it now becomes about, well, I want it this way because my ego and you want it this way because of your ego, then we're never going to get aligned on the things that really matter.
No, I couldn't agree more. Well, I want to shift subjects so that we can get to the closing questions. Talk to me about, you mentioned in Virginia, you mentioned on a farm. How did you find yourself kind of circling around to your early life and actually getting into the rural, farm upbringing, but also the beef industry?
Yeah. So I love growing up on a farm. Even though it was work, like the freedom that it offered me, I really enjoyed it. My wife grew up in New Hampshire and they had, I think, 2 acres, but it backed up into national forest land. So it seemed to them like they had a lot more land. And when we were, having kids and raising our family in San Diego, we were in Coronado for like 10 years. Then we moved to Imperial Beach, which is just south of Coronado, and bought a place down there. And like, we enjoyed our time. But man, your space is like the size of my office that I'm sitting in right now. And that always bugged me because I'm used to open spaces. And I'm probably what we would call like a introverted extrovert. And what I mean by that is like, I like people, but I like to choose when I engage with people. So I like space. I like silence. I like the ability to, not be able to see my neighbor because they live far away, but to invite my neighbor over whenever I want to invite them over. And my wife kind of felt the same way. And we knew that we wanted our kids to grow up with that same level of freedom that we had. And there's a lot of great lessons, as you know, that come from growing up on a farm. Like there's responsibility, there's chores that they're just not going to have in the city. And the place where we moved, my wife's family has basically been moving here over the last 10 years. So they've got, a set of grandparents are here, aunts and uncles are here, bunch of their cousins are here. So we knew we wanted to be near family. We knew we wanted to be back on like the rural farm life. And we were just fortunate enough to find this kind of beautiful farm. And we didn't have cattle growing up. I've always loved cattle. I always wanted to raise cattle. And now I get to raise cattle with my family out here on our farm.
I've had Joel Salatin on here a few times talking about regenerative farming. What's your philosophy on your farm?
Same thing. So Joel's farm is only about 2 hours away from ours. And I started reading a lot about regenerative ag when I was in the SEAL team still, because I knew that I wanted to do this one day. So we have it's like 56 acres. And when it's grazing season, because in the winter, nothing grows. So the cows get put in a pasture and we roll out hay for them every day. But in the grazing season, spring, summer, and fall, we move our cows every single day to a fresh patch of pasture. So they get about an acre a day to graze, and then we move them every single day. And what that does is allows the plant to flourish and not get overgrazed. And it's good for the health of the soil. It's the best thing for the cattle. We don't treat our cattle with any antibiotics or hormones or anything like that because we don't have to, because they're acting like cattle were designed to act in open air pastures. So we very much follow the same kind of philosophy. And I took my family and my nieces and nephews down to Polyface Farms to kind of see his operation and get a tour of how he does things.
We had a great conversation recently, and we're kind of looking back again. I had him during COVID as well, but this was post-COVID. And, because what I'd said is if there was ever an event in modern history that should reframe, what we eat, how we move in America, it should have been the pandemic. And, if you wrote down how to make people even more susceptible to the virus and more likely to die, it was exactly what everyone said. Don't see your family, don't see your friends, don't see the sunshine, don't see nature, watch Tiger King, order fast food and alcohol to be delivered. That's it. Couldn't have been worse. And so coming out of this, what we should have seen was, real food served in schools like we used to, PE programs bolstered, local farmers given, incentives to grow, clean food locally, because we saw that massive bottleneck in the abattoirs. With where you are now, what is your kind of perspective, your after action report on how COVID was handled, and then what is your kind of view on where we should be as far as local farming and the type of farming these days?
Yeah, I don't know that it could have been handled much worse. It goes back to that conversation we talked about leaders, and unfortunately, I'm not in those people's heads. I don't know what their intent was, but all we can judge is their actions, and they were the wrong actions. And anyone that tries to claim that they weren't now is just ignoring all the data that we have now in hindsight. The thing that I think was the most important thing that came out of the pandemic was this realization that the medical establishment, the government, and some of the research science is not infallible. And a matter of fact, we're always learning. New things are always being developed. And at times, those establishments have made the absolute wrong decisions. Like sugar at one point in time was really good for you. Smoking cigarettes at one point in time was really good for you, according to science. The food pyramid, that is absolute garbage that just got flipped on its head, was designed by the same people. So there's this, like when you look at agriculture, take that for example. I mean, I'm sure you remember like the mad cow epidemic back in like 2001. I was touring Europe with two of my friends after we graduated high school. We saved up money and we went and toured around Europe for a month after high school. And when we were in England, like we couldn't have beef because of mad cow. The reason that mad cow became an issue was because the ag industry said it was a really good idea to grind up your dead animals and feed them to your cattle because it's good protein for them. And surprise, surprise, that caused some issues. So when you look at like, hey, why are all of our cattle treated with hormones? It's because the majority of the commercial ag space, and this, I'm not hating on the farmers there that are doing this, because they're have to fit in this system that's been built for them now. They have to push them full of hormones to get them to grow fast so that they can make a profit off of them. Because if they don't do that, they carry the cow for too long and they can't make a dollar off of them and they'll go broke. Why do they have to inoculate them with antibiotics? Because they're living on top of each other in these big feedlots. Some of them are not even open air, and they're developing all of these different issues because they're not allowed to thrive out in open pasture. So we have to inoculate them with all these different antibiotics to keep them from getting sick. So I think a positive that came from COVID was just a spotlight on, one, there's no such thing as someone who's infallible. We're learning things, and I think it shined a spotlight on the fact that we've been doing things the wrong way for quite a long time.
What is your hope as far as supporting local farmers once more?
The infrastructure right now to support local farmers should, in theory, be the best it's probably ever been, because we have the internet. And it should be easy for someone to connect with a local farmer via the internet. The issue is farmers love to farm. You know what farmers don't love to do? Create websites and market their goods and manage a website. And like, hey, I don't blame them, because it's freaking terrible now that I have to do it. But it used to be that like people would get their beef from their neighbor or from their local butcher who was sourcing it from farms that are around them. And then we had this big push, lots of urban development, people moving to the cities, and then it was kind of like, well, you don't know where your food is coming from. The internet should be the big equalizer to those things, because James, if you have a farm, you should be able, if you want to build a website and market that to your neighbors, market that to the people that live in the town next to you, market that to the people that might live in your nearest city, and draw them in to buy the produce and the meat that you're producing. So I think the infrastructure is there, but it just comes down to like what farmers want to focus on and what they're good at and what they're not good at. If each farm magically had the ability to market their goods, I don't think there would be a problem anymore, because who living in a city or an urban environment doesn't want to know that their cow was treated humanely, that nothing artificial is in their beef, and shake the hand, whether in real life or digitally, of the person who's putting their heart and soul into that thing that you're about to consume.
One of my favorite books that Joel wrote was Everything I Do is Illegal. And he talked about, again, the barriers against, local farmers or even people that are just cooking out of their kitchen and be able to sell it to their neighbors. The barriers that we have for these small local farms that, obviously just supporting these mega farms and these monocrops, etc. So what are some of the challenges for an independent farm? And again, what do we need to change for that to be easier for people to be able to provide to their neighbors?
There's too much bureaucracy that's involved in the day-to-day operation of a farm or a ranch being able to sell their goods to a consumer. So again, you go back to intent versus the outcome. I think the intent originally, when those things were put in place, was to protect the consumer, to make sure that the farmer was doing the things that they needed to do to ensure that their product was safe for consumption. I think the intent of that is probably pretty noble, but I think the way that it's been executed has done nothing but put barriers between a farmer or a rancher being able to actually sell their goods and a consumer that wants those goods to be able to purchase those goods. I mean, a perfect example is raw milk. We have a neighbor who has a Jersey cow, and they're very nice, and they give us raw milk for free. I can't buy that raw milk for them because it's illegal to buy that raw milk for them. Now, if that neighbor, because of bureaucracy, puts for pet consumption only, and I buy it for my Labradoodle, that's our farm guard dog. Not really, he's useless on the farm. And I just happen to take a sip of it, well, then it's legal. But if he sells it for human consumption, he can face fines or potentially even go to jail. the number of people that have issues from raw milk, contamination in raw milk, is like minuscule, 0.1%. The number of issues that come from massive at scale dairy operations is way more than that. I mean, how many E. coli recalls have there been for tainted beef, tainted chicken, tainted pork off of commercial shelves in your grocery store? You know where that doesn't happen? At a farm where the animal is raised in an open air environment, or at an abattoir or a local butcher who has really good handling practices and is not allowing that beef to sit and get shipped across the country unfrozen for this long period of time. But like, no, it's okay for that big ag company to do that and have all these issues and recalls, but it's not okay for Farmer John to take that same risk, even though it's way, way, way less of a risk. So I think the only thing that you can do is just strip away some of the bureaucracy. Joe Salatin has a role in this administration. I don't know if he still has it or not, in hopefully breaking some of that down. RFK with Make America Healthy Again push. I know he's trying to do some of those things, which I applaud, but it's a big bureaucracy and it's not going to be dismantled overnight.
Well, I mean, I thought RFK was great prior to the election. And again, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but if, again, you're talking about intent versus action, if after a year all you've done is get rid of food dyes and turn a pyramid upside down, I'd say that's a pretty piss poor production for a year in the most powerful position. So something's going on back there that's certainly holding him back.
Yeah, I think everyone that gets a peek behind the curtain of any mechanism of government goes, oh my goodness, this is way more complex than I thought and way more difficult to dismantle, not because of necessarily the policy itself, but because of the entrenched positions from a lot of individuals that are involved in those policies. Like, there's a lot of individuals that don't want people, I shouldn't say individuals, there's a lot of entities that don't want people to be able to buy milk from their neighbor and don't want people to be able to go and purchase, farm raised cattle from their neighbor because they want to push them to a shelf where their product is.
Well, it's as we said before with the military industrial complex, there's a lot of people that don't want Americans to be healthy because they make meds, they make wheelchairs, they make implants. There's a lot of people that don't want peace because they make weapons and they make MREs and they make uniforms. So this goes back to that checks and balances. And if I really feel like if we literally just changed everything back to 100 years ago, the way we eat, the way we move, even as we talked about earlier, the way we learn, you would solve 90% of our problems right there and then. But that involves empowering local farmers to grow and to raise just like they used to, and have local, butchers and bakers and all these things, which I think we're craving as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think this mega store has just got so out of whack, and the death of the American mall, I think, is because of that. People just don't want to be going in and mindlessly, rummaging through coat racks and shelves now. They want to interact. They want to sit down. They want to break bread. They want to, share a drink, whatever it is. So I hope that we're going to start seeing this full circle to that again, because a few people making all the money. I know the monopoly was kind of worshipped in American, business for a long time, but that's other people's money that you're accumulating. We don't all need to own 15 Ferraris. We can all just have, cohabit in villages and towns and have food local and the air that's clean and the water's clean. And it's not, a unicorn with rainbows coming out of its ass. It's just literally how we lived 80, 100 years ago.
Yeah. And, a piece of that too is with the medical profession, like an increased focus on the importance of nutrition, because they get next to none in medical school right now. And it's almost like, well, the first thing that I think you should be asking someone when they come in with a chronic illness is, let's look at what you're putting into your body. And unfortunately now you have to also look at like what's in the things that you're putting in your body. All of our wheat is sprayed with pesticides. So whether you're getting that wheat in your bread or in cereal or whatever the heck, now it's not just like, well, you're having some wheat. Now it's, well, what's that grain been sprayed with that your body, and some people's bodies react very differently to it. So I hope we can go back there, and I hope we can get an increased focus on the importance of nutrition and start that cycle really young. Like you said earlier, start it in the school system where you can teach people what a real healthy meal actually looks like.
Absolutely. Going back to what you were talking about, what can we control? And you've already seen this happen a little bit. What we can control is what we spend, what we actually purchase. And, now a lot of supermarkets don't even have like a health food section. Now they have health food or healthier food throughout the entire grocery store. So I think this
Mhm.
is it. If people are really empowered to understand the damage that some of this commercial food is doing to us, and then obviously again downstream cost, your disease, not only for your wallet but also your longevity. If the America really started demanding the healthier food, the local food, you would see a shift again. Because as you said, of course, these
Yep.
corporations, they don't want you to be doing that. You want you to buy their cereal or their dairy or whatever it is. But we all have the power to just change where we buy, and also just break that myth that healthy food is expensive, because it's not. Like, fast food is getting more and more
No.
expensive now, so there's never been a better time to actually lean into local produce, local meat, and actually save money at the same time.
And it is one of the, I think, beauties of capitalism, which is like the businesses will go where the money is, and the businesses and the money is telling them to go. So if all of a sudden there is a demand for local produce, a lot of those grocery stores, they'll build relationships with local producers and they'll put them in there if that's what people are demanding. If people aren't demanding that, then why would they go out of their way and spend millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to revamp the way that they do business? So we all get a vote with our dollar. And at the end of the day, what we've seen again and again and again in America is that businesses will go where the consumer, the American public, are willing to spend their dollars. And if that's on healthy local food, then there will be avenues for people to get that regardless of where they live, because not everybody can live next to a farmer or a rancher.
Absolutely. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you
Yeah.
go. The first one I love to ask: is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
I love the book Legacy, which is written by a guy that I've come to know. And I actually brought him out to talk to NSW, a guy named James Kerr. And Legacy is a profile of the All Blacks rugby team. And the profile is really what makes them the team that they are, because historically, they're the winningest sports team in the history of sports across any sport. And it's a rugby team from a very small island, New Zealand, compared to its neighbors and the other nations that compete in rugby. So James went down there with no agenda outside of just, let's try to figure out why they're so good. Is it the coaching? Is it the talent pool they're pulling from? And those things played a part in it. But what he really found was the thing that makes the All Blacks so good is there's more tied to that black jersey than just their desire to win. In the minds of everyone that's ever put that black jersey on, they're carrying the hopes and dreams of a nation. And because of that, the culture that they keep and the standard that they keep inside of their own ranks is the greatest profile I've ever seen in how to build and maintain a culture. So if you're a leader who's like, hey, how do I improve the culture of my organization? Or how do I really form up a culture inside my organization? Or if you're a contributing member of a team that's like, hey, how do I get people on board with this direction that I want to go? I would highly recommend that they take a look at that book, because it's the best study on culture that I've ever read. I also think that book, The Generals, is a great book to read, because it's also, as well as being a tale of like what happened to the American generalship, it's also a cautionary tale of the factors that led up to that. And I think it's very easy for other industries to fall inside of that same kind of pitfall if they're not careful. Those would be two off the bat. Um, if you haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo, I'm just going to throw a pitch out there. It's my favorite book of all time, because it deals with a lot of very deep uh, things about what it means to be a human through highs and lows. So I'm going to throw that in there as as a read as well, even though, it's not a real tale.
It's funny, you're not the first person that's mentioned that book as well. So very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to read it then. What about films, documentaries, or movies?
Okay. Let's see. Films. I have to break it up. And man, I could spend probably like another 2 hours on this, but I have to break it up into like comedies and then like serious movies that you can actually learn something from. Um, I would say serious movies that you can actually learn something from. You'd be pretty hard pressed, I think, to top the movie Gladiator and what that movie is really all about and the profile of Maximus inside that movie. And I think if you're looking at like the archetype of a servant and an archetype of a well balanced man, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone better than Maximus for everything that he goes through. Rising to the generalship, being Marcus Aurelius's right hand man, not wanting to take the position that Marcus wants him to give, his loyalty to his wife and his kids, his ability to rise back up through the ranks, all of those things, pretty hard pressed. Um, Man, what else? Last of the Mohicans, same thing. I mean, if you're a young man looking for a good role model, it's right there in that movie. Either one of those people, I think, would be a good archetype for you to struggle towards. TV shows, I don't watch a lot of TV, and I think it's mainly because TV is just turned into crap. I would say the same thing with modern movies. Like everything is deconstructed. There's no such thing as a hero anymore. Everybody has to have like a dark, entangled past. And that's just absolute bullcrap. Like I served with some of the best people on the planet, and maybe some of them came from backgrounds that they had to reform themselves, but some of them were just amazing human beings that were doing their best to serve their nation. So this idea that there's no such thing as a hero and we have to try to deconstruct all of these existing heroes that we already have, I think is absolute garbage and damaging. And I'm seeing a trend now where the archetype of the hero is coming back. And I think that's very important for young men and young women to be able to see that mythos that has been part of Western civilization, this myth of the noble hero, and in some perspective, be able to see themselves in that myth or be able to see themselves striving to become a part of that myth. I think it's really important. And I think it's been missing deliberately from movies and TVs over about the past 10 to 15 years.
I'm working on creating a TV show from my latest book, and it's funny that there's a generational trauma element to it, but the whole takeaway is the hero's journey and post-traumatic
Yeah.
growth. That that doesn't have to be something that breaks you down. That if it's addressed and worked through, just like an enemy would be, that then you have scars that actually are making you stronger. Because I think there's an opportunity to have both of those. But yeah, even there's a film, Asphalt City, that portrayed FDNY paramedics, and it was dark and depressing, and the ending sucked. There was no hope whatsoever. I'm like, what the hell? We're not. But this is how we're portrayed: either a bunch of buffoons that are running around tripping over each other, or like you said, they're all like a lot of our veteran stories too. They're going to stick a gun in their mouth at the end. But struggles, that's a real human thing. But what you do with those struggles, that's what we need to really be storytelling.
Yeah, and if you look at, the golden age of Hollywood, if you will, and my family does, we don't have a TV in the house. The only TV we have is in our pole barn right behind me. So it's like a very deliberate thing if we want to watch something as a family. And we have our Friday night movie night where we get a bunch of pizza and watch a movie. And we watch, some newer stuff that's kid appropriate, but I love watching the classics with my kids. And like To Kill a Mockingbird, you're not going to get a better example of someone doing the right thing in the face of tremendous pressure to not do the right thing. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, this small town guy that's willing to go and stick his neck out in Washington to try to do the best that he can for the American people. And all of these movies have this common theme of the power of one person to make a difference. And it's true. There is a huge power in someone that just decides to do the right thing and decides to struggle against the things that they need to struggle with.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of amazing people, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah, that platoon chief that I was talking about, Dave Hansen, absolutely. Um, One of my best friends, still to this day, the the best SEAL that I've ever seen in my entire life, and one of, if not the best men I've ever met in my entire life. And he's just got the gift of wisdom, and it comes in the shape of a thick New York accent. So it seems very folksy when he gives you his wisdom.
Well, I would love to get him on if you're able to help me with that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find all things Sean. What do you do to decompress?
I love to work out. I love to box. I love to play guitar, but my biggest decompression is my family. Like there's no stress with me if I'm around my family. So if I've had a long day at work or stuff on the farm is just frustrating me, the thing that I enjoy the most that helps me de-stress is just sit down and play a game with the kids, whether it's a board game, a card game, whatever it is, and I'm instantly only thinking about how much fun I'm having right then and right there.
Beautiful. Goes back again. Ultimate currency. All right. Well, then for people listening, let's start with Primal Beef. Where can they find that and what do you offer on that site?
Yeah, the website's just primalbeef.com, and it's single sourced farm raised beef right here in the Shenandoah Valley where I am. And you can go on there. We've got curated boxes where we've made some boxes with some really good blends of cuts. And then we also have a custom box option where you can go and just put whatever beef you want in there. So whether you're looking for ground beef, steaks, barbecue cuts like brisket or beef ribs or a tri-tip, we got you covered. And I'll promise you a couple of things. You're not going to ever have better beef. If there's an issue with your order, we're going to take care of it. Myself or Paul or Declan, the other founders, are going to take care of it. And at the backside of that order, we donate a cut of beef to active duty military members and their family through the C4 Foundation. So anytime someone comes and orders a box, we take a cut out of our inventory. Doesn't cost the customer anything. It's totally on us. We take a cut out of our inventory and we set it aside, and we donate that inventory periodically to active duty SEALs and their family. So not only you're getting good beef for yourself, but you're hooking up some service members as well. And that service member's not me, by the way. Full disclosure. I don't just take it and put it in my
Read the
refrigerator.
small print.
Yeah.
Going back to that, just while we're talking about leadership and business, I also feel, I guess I'm kind of romanticizing about a lot of things, the good old days, but with this worshipping of monopoly and with these James Bond villains that we've got as a result of that, I feel like one of the most powerful business models is the social business model, where
Mhm.
woven into the sales of your product is some sort of altruistic practice. What is your view of that on the grander scale, that being like the kind of the next generation of businesses that's really kind of leaning into the consumer as well?
I love seeing it. And I think the only thing that I would say is I hope it comes from a place of true desire to give back and not as like a marketing scheme to try to get people to buy your product. And I think it is. I think it comes from a genuine place for people to want to give back. And that was really important to us when we founded Primal Beef. And Jocko's a partner. He's the other founder of Primal Beef. And we knew that we wanted this company to be something that provided the American public with something that they needed, which was farm fresh American beef with no hormones, no antibiotics, none of that nonsense in there. But we also knew that we wanted the company to be more than just that. So we have the partnership with the C4 Foundation where we feed active duty service members. And then the abattoir that we use, Seven Hills, down in Lynchburg, Virginia, a couple of hours from us, we chose them because they're the best in the business of what they do. They're a small, boutique, if you want to, abattoir that focuses on, the quality of the cuts and the quality of the dry aging. But they're also very mission focused, and they hire and train butchers from a work release program. So they're taking people that have made some bad decisions in their life, spent some time behind bars, and they're giving them a chance that most other people are not willing to give, which is giving them a chance at employment. And not just that, they're teaching them a very marketable and very important skill, which is how to butcher and process an animal, which is a skill that's going away. And I can tell you from going down there and spending time with them that this is a life-changing thing for these individuals, because now not only are they given a second chance at life, they're given a career and they're made part of a family at Seven Hills that genuinely cares about them. So that desire to take care of people around us was woven all throughout Primal Beef. And you are seeing that more and more with companies that are starting. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it speaks to the heart also of what it means to be an American and wanting to take care of your fellow citizens.
That reminds me, I've talked about this a lot on here. I had the superintendent of Bastøy prison in Norway, and they have everyone from petty crime through to murderers in this prison. But the prison looks like a housing development. It's on an island outside of Oslo, so they've lost their freedom, but they live together, they cook together, they clean together, they go to work, they go to school. Because the Norwegian philosophy is one day, 95% of all prisoners are going to move back into your street. So do you want someone who was held in a box that had to, have a shank in case they got murdered that day, or drugs that were smuggled in? Or do you want someone who's truly rehabilitated? And even in Portugal, if you look at how they reversed addiction there, they decriminalized addiction, not selling, not smuggling, but the addiction itself. And job creation is one of their tools in there as well. So looking at a human being and saying, they're fallible just like I am. They make mistakes. They went down that one road. Maybe they didn't have that mentor that I had woven into their crossroads, and be able to have these programs that really allow people to get back on their feet and become a productive member of society again. I mean, it's exactly what we need here.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's awesome to see that those countries are doing things like that and that it's working.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was Primal Beef. What about Echelon Front? Tell me kind of what the different branches of the leadership training are there and where people can find that.
Yeah. Our goal is to just teach the skill of leadership to as many people as we possibly can. And I use that word skill very deliberately because it is a skill. There's no such thing as a born leader. That's a myth. There's no such thing as a child that emerged from the womb with all of the characteristics and traits that they're going to need to be a good leader. It's a skill. We can all learn it. We can all get better at it. No matter how effective we are as leaders, there's always things that we can do to improve. There's always new tools that we can leverage to better the lives of the people that we're leading. And that's our mission at Echelon Front. And there's a couple of different buckets that falls into. So we have events where people can come to them, like the muster, where there's 1,000 people that come from all over the world to attend this 2-day deep dive into leadership. And you're going to hear from Jocko and Leif, our founders, and from all the different instructors. And you're going to get time to liaise with the different leaders that are there and pick their brains. And then we also have a business unit. Our main business unit is going and working with companies and going and working with teams. So, a leader or a team might reach out and say, hey, I'd really like to bring Echelon Front in to spend some time with my leaders, to get to know them, to get to hear what their struggles and what their challenges are. And then let's talk about some strategies and some opportunities, excuse me, and some tools that they can use to be more effective in their leadership role. Or sometimes the company will go, hey, we just promoted from within, and we've now got 50 managers that have never managed people before, and we want to set them up for success. So we want you to spend some time with them and really help us prepare them for that first real leadership role that they're going to undertake. So that's really our driving mission as a company, is just to teach these principles of leadership to as many people as we possibly can.
And then you have the online format as well.
Yes, the online format is something that kind of stemmed from COVID, where we could no longer go and interact with our clients and our teammates at these different companies and different teams in person. So we started an online format. And over the last 5 years, we've really focused on building out the digital content around leadership that we have, because what we've realized is our limiting factor to teaching this is us. There's only so many of us that can go around and and talk with the company and meet with the company. So we're building out this digital database of all these different leadership topics and all these different leadership tools that companies can utilize to help improve their leaders' capabilities.
And that's echelonfront.com.
Echelonfront.com. And if you're interested in the online stuff, you'll find plenty of information out there. If you're interested in talking about maybe bringing out Echelon Front to support your team or one of your events, you can go on there, and there's a kind of a question submittal form that'll go directly to our team, and they'll follow up with you real quick.
Brilliant. Well, Sean, I want to thank you. It's been such an interesting and diverse conversation, from obviously, active duty in the SEALs to regenerative farming and everything in between. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely, James. And again, man, I really appreciate the opportunity. And it was awesome to see you at the muster, and it's awesome to spend some time with you today.